Dubus III at the Pine Manor Summer Solstice Conference this past summer. The students in his workshop were abuzz at mealtimes, rocked by the combination of Dubus's easy charm and laid-back manner, and those who just had dinner with him will attest to that. But it was in combination with a fierce loyalty to story and to craft, the rigors of language, of paying close attention to language. Dubus clearly was challenging the students to rise above their easy habits and to approach their stories and their writing styles with integrity and even a ruthlessness. No cliches, no easily arrived at descriptions, keen listening to the interior landscape. That's what these students were telling me that he demanded. I wasn't part of the workshop, I was there for poetry, but one night, before faculty reading, about 100 of us were assembled in a high-ceilinged, wood-paneled, luxuriously antique room in a really old mansion. And one of the conferees, who was wheelchair-bound, buzzed across the manicured lawn to the door, only to find she couldn't get up the old stone steps and join us. Well, everybody just stood around for a few minutes, either ignoring or bemoaning the situation, but it was Andre Dubus, who noticed a large metal handicapped ramp in the corner and moved to get it. Andre and I carried it outside and put it in place. I was pretty impressed that the resident star writer didn't wait to act, didn't wait for someone else to do the dirty work, and I can tell you that metal ramp wasn't light. But so what? So he's a nice guy. What does that have to do with his work? Nothing. But on the other hand, there's been a lot of talk about how dark Dubus's work is. And I've heard tonight about the new book coming out in the summer that's going to tear up people's internal landscapes as well. And you're going to hear from that book tonight. How many readers shuddered and sometimes even turned away from his characters, his short stories, or as many of you have been reading, House in Sand and Fog, unable to face the awfulness in some of his characters' lives, their choices and behaviors. And here's the thing. Dubus doesn't moralize. He didn't lift that ramp because it was the right thing to do. He lifted it because it was there, and it was a thing that needed to be done. And he doesn't write dark stories. He pays attention to the nuances of the characters who have come to him, and he honors their multiplicities. The drunk who's trying desperately to save his family. The young prison guard who doesn't know the ropes enough to not be empathetic. Or the prisoner who can be both cruel and deeply sympathetic. Or the upper-class colonel who's willing to use the system to his own benefit, even though it's morally wrong. Or the sympathetic young woman with a drinking problem who just refuses to take responsibility. Dubus's characters are not static. They are real people, full of paradox and puzzlements, fears and foibles, and sometimes a little bit of nobility. His stories have jouissance, a French term coined by the psychoanalyst Lacan and appropriated for literary criticism by Barthes, meaning the relationship between pain and joy in the experience of a story. The way codes of expectation are broken, the way a character or a story force the reader to surrender to it. A kind of writerly violence that forces a confrontation with reality and leaves the reader, us, apprehending the world differently than we did before we read the story and met those characters. This is what Dubus has, jouissance, the ability to live inside the landscape of his stories and the internal landscapes of each of his characters, and be with the paradoxes of what it means to be human. He doesn't moralize. Look, here, learn something and be a better person, any more than he lifted that ramp to be good. He says, look, here's what I heard when I met these characters, when they revealed their stories to me. This is what I saw. This is what I know. Humanity is a rangy, tangled mess. And here, inside this chaos, there's order as well. And Dubus's stories chronicle that. And that's why he lifted the ramp. It was a little bit of order he could see inside that day's chaos, just like it was a story. And he's a darn nice guy, too. Let's give him a warm reception. Andre Dubus III.
Well, thank you for that really generous, lovely introduction, Laura. Laura and I just met last summer, like she told you, and I really feel we've known each other a long time, and it's a joy to be here, and thank you for having me. And you guys, thanks for coming out. I know there are a lot of things, other things you can be doing. So I'm going to read my new novel. It'll take about 4 days. 800, no. You know what, honestly, my favorite part of doing readings is actually having a conversation afterwards. So I'm not going to read too long. I'm going to read maybe 25 minutes, 26 minutes, and then, all right, maybe 28 and a half minutes. But then I want to have a conversation, and the writing students and I were having a good one at dinner, and I'm happy just to continue talking. I know there are a lot of writers in this room, maybe everybody's in this room writes. So I'm just going to read a little bit from this new novel coming out in June. It's called The Garden of Last Days. And I have to be honest, you guys, I'm terrified to read to you what I'm about to read to you, and I've never read it out loud, even at home by myself yet. So I'm terrified. I'm always a little scared to read out loud, but all right, I'm not going to go on. I'm going to read the first 3 pages of the book. It's from many points of view, and you'll meet this woman. And I'm going to jump ahead to one of the other major characters in the book, and he's the one who scares me, and he scared me the whole time I wrote it. He's based on one of the Saudi hijackers. He's a young Saudi in Florida at a strip club, and that's why I'm terrified to read it. But I'm gonna. And I'll start right now. The Garden of Last Days, late summer, 01, Thursday. April drove north on Washington Boulevard in the late afternoon heat. She passed housing developments behind acacia and cedar trees, Spanish moss hanging from their limbs like strings of dead spiders. Between her legs was the black coffee she'd bought at the Mobil station on the way out of town, and it was too hot to drink, the sun still shining bright over the Gulf and blinding her from the side like something she should have seen coming. Like Jean getting laid up, and now there's no one to watch Franny, and no calling in sick at the Puma. And little Franny was strapped in her car seat in the back, tired and happy with no idea how different tonight will be, how strange it could be. But even in September, Thursday was a big money night, 7 to 800 take-home, and that's what April concentrated on as she drove, Franny's chin starting to loll against her chest. April made herself think of that fat roll of 10s and 20s she'd have at closing, how she'd fold it into the front pocket of her jeans, then go to the house mom's office off the dressing room and give Tina 100 before she found Franny in her PJs on Tina's brown vinyl couch. And she'd try not to think of the walls above Tina's desk, covered with dancers' schedules and audition Polaroids of naked women, some of them under postcards from girls who came and went. In the corner were a small TV and VCR where once Lewis kept playing a porno starring Bobby Blue, who used to dance at the Puma as Denise, though the name her mother gave her was Megan. But Tina would be sure no tapes like that were around. She'd let Franny watch Disney videos as long as she wanted, bring her chicken fingers and fries from the kitchen, play cards with her, or give her the back of an old schedule she could draw on with a Puma pen. And if the noise from the club got too loud, the rock and roll numbers the DJ blasted, the constant clink of bottles and glasses from the bar, all the men's hooting and hollering, Tina would turn up Aladdin or Cinderella or The Little Mermaid and pull the sliding door halfway shut so she could keep the right girls on rotation at the right time, because it was all just a show, April told herself now. It was just a different kind of show business, and Franny'd have to be backstage just this one time, and she'd be fine. She was only 3, and she wouldn't know what she was seeing, and she'd be fine. April passed the industrial park, acres of one-story buildings behind hurricane fences, barbed wire coiled along the top, the sky an endless coral haze. She checked Franny in the rearview mirror. There was a ring of grape around her mouth from the slush puppy she let her have at the Mobil. April had put sunblock all over her in Jean's garden. Jean, with her heavy body and aging face, she always looked embarrassed to take April's rent. It had never taken a penny all these months to babysit Franny. But nothing's for free, and you should never count on anything that is. And April wanted to know how she could have fallen so easily into thinking that Jean and her kindness was a sure thing she could trust. How could she not have found at least one backup babysitter in all the months she'd been here, just in case? And Jean sounding so guilty on the phone from the hospital. 2 days of tests, a bunch of tests for her heart. Up ahead on the southbound side of the boulevard was a neon sign for the Puma Club. 30 feet high and always on, it was 2 silhouettes of naked women, one standing, the other sitting with a knee drawn up to her breast. Just seeing it, something hot and hard gathered in April's stomach, because even when she'd auditioned for Lewis back in March, when she'd done her routine to a ZZ Top song out on the floor of the empty club at 8 in the morning, she hadn't brought Franny inside with her. Instead, she'd parked the Sable under the trees, and she'd locked her into the car with coloring books and crayons, a chocolate milk, and 2 powdered donuts. She checked the doors twice and told Franny through the glass to lie down on her belly and eat and draw. And as she walked toward the club, she tried to ignore the muffled cry of her daughter calling her from the car. April told herself it was in the shade and was hard to see unless you were looking for it. They was all locked up anyway, and what else could she do? Leave her alone back in the motel? They'd been here only 3 weeks and knew no one. She'd be done in less than 30 minutes anyway, though it turned out to be 45. And when she'd run to the car and unlocked it, it was full of heated air, and Franny was sweating, and it looked like she cried a while. April had wiped her face and made her drink the rest of her chocolate milk, though it was warm, and she swore she'd never do anything even close to that ever again, and took them to a lunch and matinee they couldn't afford. April slowed for the illegal U-turn through the median strip. A patch of gravel she steered onto too fast, rocking her Sable, splashing hot coffee through her jeans onto her thigh. She turned and checked Franny. Her chin had swung to her other shoulder, but she was still asleep. April edged up to the southbound boulevard and waited for a Winnebago to lumber by. Her thigh burned. She reached for the box of tissues and pressed one on the spill. Barely cool air blew in her face, and at this moment, she hated this car and her ex-husband for buying it. She hated Jean and her weak heart. She hated Tina, the house mom, for being the one to watch over her Franny. She even hated Florida and its Gulf Coast that Stephanie up north had told her she'd love. But more than anything, she hated herself, April Marie Connors, for doing what she was about to do, for breaking the one rule she swore she'd never break, pulling out onto the macadam, then driving into the crushed shell lot of the Puma Club for men, her daughter Franny right there in the car with her. So I'm going to jump ahead 250 pages. All you have to know is that this character, he's 26 years old. His name's Bassam Al-Jazani. Something's happened at the club that has brought the police, and they're interrogating the men remaining who were the customers at the club. It's very late. These kuffar, look at them. They sit at the dirty tables in this dirty hole, wearing the short pants that show themselves. They smoke and laugh, and some of them seem frightened of their own police as they are asked one at a time into the front area to be questioned. Soon Bassam will be as well. Twice he has checked his pockets, and 3 times he has inspected his license to make certain it is the one from Florida, not Virginia, though his part will be activated in Massachusetts, a word he cannot say. Only Boston, this he can say. Most of these policemen are young, like him. They believe they are strong, but it would be easy to kill them. He has learned so many ways to do it. Hand to knife, knife to gun, gun to bomb. At the camp for training, he was best with small weapons, and there is the feeling he has been given a gift he will never use. Beside his table, 2 men laugh. On their fingers are the rings of wives. One of them wears a tie and shirt, his sleeves folded back to reveal a gold watch, and he smiles briefly at Bassam, who does not return it. But he nods so as not to incite an argument, so as not to draw attention. A young policeman curls his finger to the businessman, who jokes with the other and rises. Bassam must be permitted to leave soon. There is the drive back to the east. He should be there before sunrise for the first prayer. Amir is in the north now, but each dawn for days the Egyptian has kicked his mattress and Tariq's mattress and the mattress of Imad. The time of living like the kuffar is over. Get up and perform your ablutions, my brothers. We must pray for strength. Prayer is better than sleep. Rise. The Jew owner moves among the tables, grasping his pot of coffee. He sees to the comfort of these people. He wishes to come back again and again. One of the whores, the white one with the red hair, follows with cream and sugar, and Bassam allows the Jew to pour his coffee, though he will no longer touch the cup touched by the Jew. This hatred gives him strength. The hatred that was so pure and clear in the disciplined months in camp. The hatred that began to weaken in Dubai and has weakened further here in this Florida with its heat and all the women who each day so much of them show so much of themselves. Amir has moved them to many places. Delray Beach, Boynton Beach, Hollywood, Deerfield. The small rooms smelling of men and incense and pizza they often eat. The empty boxes stacked upon the floor near the kitchen sink where they would perform their ablutions. But moving so much has kept them united. Bassam and Imad and Tariq like one man now. A shaheed with 3 hearts, with 3 heads, but 1 heart. 1 heart. With Amir, they had enrolled at gymnasiums in each town, places where the kuffar go to keep their bodies as well maintained as the Grand Am and Le Mans and Duster Bassam and his brothers had driven in their old nothingness. At the first one in Venice, because they knew nothing of lifting weights, the gym manager assigned them a trainer Amir ignored. He did not change into exercise clothing as the others did, but remained dressed in a collared shirt and pressed pants and leather shoes from Germany. He moved from machine to machine, pushing or pulling on whatever handles or bars there were to hold, sweating lightly, not speaking to or even looking at the woman trainer named Kelly who tried to correct him. She was young, the age of Bassam, Tariq, and Imad. Tariq, that habit of never closing his lips fully, which makes him look stupid though he is not. He stared at her body you could see so easily in its tight gym clothing. Her uncovered arms and legs, centimeters of her flat belly too. And Imad, tall, heavy Imad, who back home had told jokes and laughed, which made everyone else laugh. Since the camps he has grown quiet. His laughter turned to stone, and he listened to the young trainer talk as if deciding the most efficient way to kill her. But Bassam liked her brown eyes, her brown hair, how she had it tucked up into pins, revealing her neck, how she smiled at him and touched his shoulder or arms or back as she instructed him. She was kind. He could see it and feel it. She was kind, as were so many others. Gloria, the real estate woman who found them their first apartment in Delray Beach. She was short and wore very much jewelry and lipstick, but she laughed at whatever she said and looked into Bassam's eyes with hers, blue and smiling, and he felt liked by her even though she did not know him. It made him want to sit with her, a kafir and a woman, and sip tea and tell her things he had never told anyone. She asked them their names and tried to pronounce them correctly, though she could not, and she laughed at herself, squeezed his arm, and he could not bear being in her presence any longer. There was Cliff, the man at the fuel station store 3 blocks south. Taller than Bassam, he was as old as his father, his hair colored blonde, his whiskers gray. Upon his arms were inked figures of naked women. And when Bassam came in for more milk or bread or cokes, he asked how his studies were coming. Was he having any damn fun? There were the women who served them food in restaurants, the young ones or older ones, the pretty or the ugly. They were polite and smiled while looking them in their eyes, except Amir's. Their smiles changed then. They could see and feel his hatred for them. And Bassam had felt soft and weak and not worthy of the title Shaheed. These people should fear him too. He was prepared to do what he was chosen for. They must not doubt this. No one should question this. It had been months since their training, and now he and Tariq and Imad were back home. After the purity of camp, where daily they had fought hand to hand, where they fired the AK-47 while running, where they wired plastic explosives while reciting from Al-Anfal and Al-Tawbah, where they fasted and cleansed themselves, and where their softness fell away like fat from a lamb. It was difficult being once again in the dusty and idle streets of Khamis Mushat. Karim and the others wanted to race, to smoke, to gossip, to stay baboons. Imad and Tariq had grown beards and tried to teach their old friends to stay away from these evils. But Karim, standing before them in his Nike cap and t-shirt and jeans, his shiny cell phone in his hand, he was already lost. For 2 years he had studied in London, something he was always boasting, and he showed them the photograph of the Zionist girl from Jerusalem who had loved him, his mind soiled, his heart falling to the west. Karim told them they should not believe everything the imams say. Read the Quran, my friends. It says, Al-Kitab, the people of the book, Christians and Jews, deserve respect because they are fellow monotheists. Have you read all the surahs? Because I have. Read 3:113, 115. They believe in Allah and the last day. They enjoin what is right and forbid what is wrong, and they hasten in emulation of all good works. They are in the ranks of the righteous. And that is why they enslaved the Palestinians, Tariq said. That is why they occupy our land and kill our brothers in Iraq. You have a Jew. What can you tell us about anything? Go play with your cell phone. You are not going where we are going. Yes, Karim laughed. Have a nice trip. And he turned and walked away, the sun on his back, dust on the soles of his Nike shoes. Soon he would be an unbeliever, and after his death he would walk the bridge over hell as all souls do. And Bassam could only leave it to the most merciful to spare him from the fall to Jahannam. For Karim and the rest did not know who they were talking to. Shuhada, martyrs who would sit in the highest rooms with Allah, men whose names would never be forgotten. The moon was high. It shone blue on the dome of the mosque across the street. It was after Isha, the final prayer, and Bassam sat in the outer building of their home before his father. Many of Bassam's brothers wanted to sit down as well, but Ahmed al-Jazani told them to leave until the meal was served. He wanted to talk alone with Bassam. They sipped hot tea. Inside the main house, Bassam's mother and sisters were preparing lamb kufta. He could smell it and knew they would squeeze lemons over it and serve it with tahina sauce, and there would be laban bikhiyar, and he was very hungry from the fasting in camp. His father sat against the wall, dressed in a new thobe, the color of linen. It was too loose upon him, and he appeared tired. So you have taken up jihad? Yes, father. Do you understand what this means? Yes. His father looked at him as he had always looked at him, as if all the sons before Bassam had been the best. Tell me then, what does this mean? It means I am prepared to die for Allah. No, that is not jihad. That is a lower meaning of it. His father sipped his tea, his eyes on him. What did they teach you at this place? The truth, father. They taught me the truth. And what is the truth, Bassam? Who can know the truth but Allah? Bassam nodded. He would not receive his father's blessings. Why sit here any longer? Why sit before this man who had built a mosque, yes, but also buildings on the airbase of the Kuffar? His father was an important man, an al-Jazani, but his mind and heart had become weakened by the al-Shirk, the polytheists and the unbelievers. Father? Yes, speak. They want to occupy our land. They want to separate us from Islam. Khalid, what of Khalid? Nothing. Do not say this. What of Khalid? He was lost. He died because he was lost. Your brother drove too fast. Do you understand this? He was no more lost than am I. Bassam looked down at his hands. They were clean, his feet as well, his body strong and pure and prepared, yet he was ashamed. He sat there before his own father, ashamed of him, of Ahmed al-Jazani. His father sat forward. He lowered his tea quickly, some of it spilling onto his hand. You have never been a bright boy, Bassam, so you must listen to me carefully. Jihad is this. It is a struggle within yourself, that is all. It is the struggle to live as Allah wishes us to live, as good people. Do you understand? As good people. Now go call your brothers, please. Soon they were all eating kufta, and it was clear to Bassam, the dull boy, the slow one, that his father had favored not Rashad the officer or Adil the engineer, not the businessman so many of his brothers had become, 3 of them moving their families to Riyadh, not even the one who had worked so hard as a stock boy for Ali Al-Fad. No, their father had favored the one who had done nothing but dream of the West and smoke and drive too fast listening to an American Jew. And Allah took him from Ahmed al-Jazani. Allah took the son whose death would hurt him most. Because Ahmed al-Jazani, builder of air bases for the kuffar, he has forgotten the creator, the mighty, the sustainer and provider, as have so many others across the kingdom. They have allowed televisions into their homes. They have installed satellite dishes onto their roofs, and now their families gather between Maghrib and Isha and watch programs from the West. Censored, yes, but the women are uncovered, and the men carry weapons and drive shining cars in their fallen cities. On Fridays, the day of gathering, entire families used to picnic in the desert between the evening prayers. Now they stay inside to be drawn into the television of the kuffar, while thousands of young men like Karim lounge in the streets in kuffar clothing, secretly listening to their music and dreaming of lying again with Jews. Meanwhile, the Zionist Crusader Alliance slaughter their Muslim brothers and sisters in Chechnya and Kashmir, Afghanistan, Bosnia, and Palestine. It was 2 hours before the final prayer. The mosque was empty. Bassam, Tariq, and Imad were dressed in clean thobes, and they had performed their ablution slowly and with care. Tariq's beard was thick, while Imad's was light and bushy, and in it was a crumb of bread his ablutions had not found, and Bassam reached out and picked it free. Imad's eyes grew light, as if he were about to joke, but then he nodded, and they felt facing Mecca. They held hands. Tariq small and worn, Imad's large, still damp from his ablutions. At camp, many times during the day, they were told to recite the Shahada, and so they did it now, their heads bowed. There is no God worthy to be worshipped except Allah, and Muhammad is the messenger of Allah. Imad looked down at Bassam as if he were unsure what to do next. Bassam closed his eyes and breathed in the air still sweet from the incense burned for Maghrib. Inside his head and heart were the words he had recited again and again while cleaning his weapon at camp, pulling free the loaded magazine, blowing dust from the breech, ramming the oiled rod into the barrel. And from his book, O Lord, pour your patience upon us and make our feet steadfast and give us victory over the unbelievers. Lord, forgive our sins and excesses. You moved the clouds. You gave us victory over the enemy. Conquer them and give us victory over them. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. There is no God worthy to be worshipped except Allah. And yes, Bassam, say again the oath you made in camp. The pledge of Allah and His covenant is upon me, to energetically listen and obey the superiors who are doing this work, rising early in times of difficulty and ease. Bismillah, in the name of Allah. And once more, the Shahada. Bassam stood first, Imad and Tariq following. Imad's eyes were shining. He smiled down at them and put his arms around their shoulders. Brothers, we have bound ourselves to the Holy One as Shuhada. This bayat has sealed this. Inshallah, we will live together forever in Jannah. And he hugged Bassam and Tariq to him, his thobe smelling of fresh linen, his throat of soap and water. Thank you very much.
Everyone has friends. There's online friends, friends to go out with on a Saturday night, friends to hang out with and do nothing, friends who show up on moving day. And then there are the friends who'll be there if someone is dealing with a mental illness. Are you one of those friends?
Once they've outgrown their toddler seat, they're still not ready for adult safety belts alone. 4'9" is the magic number. Until then, kids need a booster seat. Make sure your little pumpkin gets there safely. Visit boosterseat.gov.
At dinner tonight, you actually described one of your novels like holding a baby in the womb, and as precious as that is for someone. My question to you is, in the writing process, you say that there's a lot of shaving that has to be done with your original novel. Do you feel it as a personal loss when you have to downsize a book to that amount of proportion? Like Sand and Fog's 365 pages. How many pages was that before you shaved it?
What a beautiful question. Thank you. You guys all heard a question? I won't repeat it. It's too elegant for me to repeat. That's a great question, because I do think, and this is true, I think, for people in many art forms, that all right, these things come from mysterious places. Who knows where they come from? I don't know. One of the things I find myself saying to writing students is we all know how babies are made. We know the biology of intercourse and sperm and egg and all that stuff. And we all have philosophies and religions, or none. But we still don't know why we're here. I don't know why we're here. I don't know if we go on after we die. I don't know if there's a soul. I think there is. I didn't pray till I had kids. Now I pray every night. I bring this up because, yeah, so you have this relationship with these characters, and novels take a long time. Studies have shown the average book takes 2 to 10 years to write. House of Sand and Fog took me 4.5 years. When I started that book, my wife was pregnant with our first child. When I finished, we had 3 kids, you know? But your question is so wonderfully tough, because you're asking, does it hurt when you give birth to this thing and you realize it can be a finer thing? You would never shave away your child, ever, and that's where the analogy has to stop. But with writing, you have to be merciless. Faulkner had a great line, and I quote it all the time, and I hate this line. I hate it, because it's true, and it hurts. But he said, you have to murder your darlings. You have to murder them. You'll write scenes that took you months. You'll write passages that took 1.5 years. And you realize that, out of that 120 pages, 3 are worth keeping. And you have to shave 18 months of your life. Do I get criticism for writing from the point of view of the other? I honestly haven't gotten a lot, but a lot of writers do. And we've talked about this earlier today. My friends, I was terrified to write from the point of view of the Saudi. Terrified because I truly believe what Hemingway said. He said, the job of the writer is not to judge, but to seek to understand. And we know not all Saudis and not all Muslims are terrorists. We know that's actually a tiny, tiny minority of a tiny, tiny minority. But every day on the way to school, I passed the house of a woman whose husband was killed on the first plane, and here I am spending months and months writing from the point of view of one of the men who did it. And there was a feeling of sort of betraying my own people. Yet I felt, and I feel strongly and passionately, that's the job of the writer. That's the job. We also write from the point of view of Hitlers and people who do pedophiles and serial killers and people who do terrible things. Miranda, I don't think that you can choose your subject. I think the subject really does choose the writer. I cannot tell you how many times I've wanted to write about this and ended up only writing about that. But I want to quote Rosellen Brown, who had a great line about this. White males understandably get some heat for writing from the point of view of dark-skinned people, women. White men have been the privileged gender and race for many years, right, in the world. And the rage that's behind people's outrage about having written from the point of the other is justified. It comes from genocide. However, it's misguided, in my opinion. What Rosellen Brown said, I thought so eloquently, was, she said, look, it is not an act of imperialism to try to imagine your life. To put myself in your shoes, it's actually an act of friendship. The risk is, right, as writers, we fail terribly and don't even get it close to right. But I think that should be the only risk, that you failed miserably and everyone knows it. So yes, but I haven't gotten a lot of flack. House of Sand and Fog, I heard some nice things from Iranians, which was very gratifying. Thank you. That's a good question. I've worked a lot of jobs. How has that affected my writing? I also did some weird jobs. I was a bounty hunter for 6 months. I actually went to Mexico looking for a killer, and I've never written a word about it. I'm going to gay bars in Mexico, speaking no Spanish, looking for a bisexual hitman. And I haven't written a word about it. I did write one bad poem about rats on the moonlit beach in Mazatlan. What the hell is that doing? I don't know. What were you saying? Oh, jobs. So I worked a lot of jobs. That was one job. The honest answer is I don't know how these various jobs have influenced my writing. I know that a lot of us in this 21st century wear a lot of hats. It's not just me. We all live these terribly complex lives, and we're chasing these gadgets that are going off all the time. And, you know, my God, kids need Palm Pilots, for God's sakes, so you make an appointment to talk to them. I was telling Elizabeth earlier, who interviewed me, that I personally don't think no experience a writer has will ever hurt him or her. It can only help, even the terrible stuff, unfortunately. But I don't think you need to have done anything remotely interesting at all to write incredible stuff. Here's what I know. Everybody gets an imagination. Everybody. One of the things that I find troubling about this kind of forum where the writer's in front of the readers and blah, 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 there's sort of this subtext that, oh, writers have imagination and we readers get to read their imaginations. Wrong! We all get one. Tolstoy said, art is transferring feeling from one man's heart to another. And if you think about that, if the reader's imagination is not even close to as wild and strange and mysterious and terrifying as the writer's, actually even better, then the transmission of the book to the reader can't happen. I say this because I bow down at the altar of the imagination. And it's in all of us. I do believe that within everybody in this room is the knowledge of the other if you go deeply enough. There's a knowledge of what it's like to be a squirrel. There's a knowledge of what it's like to be a Tyrannosaurus Rex eating that squirrel's great-great-great-great-great-great-grandparent. If there were squirrels, I don't think so. So, to answer your question, the jobs are good. I don't even know if they've helped me, but I know that you don't need to do a bunch of wild, weird stuff like go to Mexico looking for killers to write interesting stuff, because we all get an imagination. Yeah. Yes, sir?
How much time do you spend on, I'm not a writer or that much of a reader, how much time do you spend on your research, and how do you know when you've researched enough to start writing about it without having someone, without getting that letter or email saying, you know, you got it wrong?
Oh, man, yeah. He said, how often do you research, how long do you research, and how do you know when you've done enough to avoid that letter or email saying you got it wrong? You know, you're always going to get something wrong. You know, I finished House of Sand and Fog. My wife read it. I hadn't shown anyone for 4.5 years. She was the first reader. I'm waiting, you know, I'm about to have a heart attack waiting for her to come down and tell me how this thing I've spent 4.5 years writing is. She comes down. She looks a little haggard. She's a beautiful woman. She didn't look so good. And I said, well, honey, well? She said, how could you? What do you mean? Is that it? How could you do that? She went on. And then she corrected a lot of stuff. Like she said, you know, honey, we don't call it rouge anymore. I said, no, that red stuff you put on your face. What? It's not rouge? No, honey, it's blush. So I had to go on and on. The mistakes are endless. But I do find, especially with the novel, I think the novel takes writers places where, because it's so large, usually it takes on a large territory. There are so many areas you write yourself into about which you're completely ignorant. But to answer your question directly, I don't know. It's an intuitive thing. All right, so for this Saudi guy, who's just one of 9 major characters in this new book, I had to stop writing, and I read for 4 straight months. I have probably read 30 books, including the Quran, and I read books about Islam, and I read the history of Saudi Arabia, and I read about 9/11, and I interviewed a Palestinian who lived in Saudi Arabia, and I talked to an Arab expert, and even then I wasn't sure it was enough. But you know what? I felt as if I'd eaten too much. You know, I was full. I said, no, I got to go digest this. So I went and digested it, and just hoped that I pulled up what was useful. I do want to say one more thing, though, about this. I think that there are factual... I think in this culture of ours, we sometimes confuse the facts with the truth. You know what I mean? Right. I think if I ask anybody in this room to tell us a bad family, but show of hands, how many of you have had one bad family dinner in your life? How many have had over 500? Yeah, it's normal, right? It's normal. But I bet you if I asked any of you to tell us the story of your bad family dinner, you'd tell it. I ask you, and your sister would tell it. She'd say, oh no, it wasn't Uncle Tommy, it was Uncle Bobby. The mom wasn't even there, she was in the hospital. She wasn't in the hospital, she'd been dead 14 years. Tommy was dead. They go on and on. No one agrees, but you're going to come to blows about what really happened. So I think that there are the facts, which research can take you to, but then I think there are larger truths that memory and imagination can take you to. Right, so you might get a few facts wrong about how a stripper puts the money in her garter belt. Maybe you'll get there's a lot of naked women in this book, and maybe I got it wrong about where they put the money and how. But I'm actually more concerned about, but did I capture the truth of what it's like to dance naked for men in a smoky room? That's what I was really going for. So
my brother lives in Hollywood, Florida,
wow.
And that strip club is a very well-known place. You go by it all the time. So there will be a lot of people reading the book who will actually
give me a hard time.
Go to that strip club, yeah, right?
Yeah. That's why I changed the name of the strip club. I did. Question, what did I know about Bassam before I did the research? I knew that, and look, this sounds precious, and I really hate when writers talk this way. But I knew that he was insisting on being in the novel more than I wanted him to be. If that makes any sense. I know there are a lot of fiction writers in the room, but I just wanted to write honestly, it's a big fat book. I was planning to write a short story. What started it was I had an image of cash on a bureau. And I imagined, well, what's it like to be an exotic dancer, a stripper, who danced for one of these men and didn't know it. And when the smoke cleared, she realized that some of that cash she got by dancing for one of these men who committed mass murder and killed themselves. So I was just going to write about her. The character of Bassam came in necessarily because they were going to have they were going to cross paths. And then it became clear through my research on strip clubs, and I actually had to say to my wife, honey, I really have to go get some money together, get my brother and my best friend, go to Florida for 3 days, rent a car, and go to strip clubs for research I'm doing. I really said that. She looked at me, she said, you could really screw me over. I said, but so to answer your question, I wrote the scene with them, with Bassam in the private room with the main character April, who I read the first 3 pages of, and I'm writing 18 months, 2 years later. There's a climax happening along. There are other dramatic stuff going on in the book, and it just felt like forgive the pun, but it felt like a fake climax. It didn't feel real. It felt as if there was something I was completely avoiding. What I was avoiding was Bassam. He was, it's very intuitive, but I could feel him pulling on my sleeve. Come, there are a few things I want to say. And I resisted for the reasons I said earlier. So that was my introduction, was simply his insistence as a character. Hey, look, I'm just as important in this book as this guy and that woman and this kid, and I have something I want to say. And I finally surrendered, and then I had to go to research for months before he could even begin to pretend to imagine his world. I learned a lot. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Yes.
So kind of staying on topic of research, I noticed that in both novels you included the foreign languages of your main characters.
Yeah.
So how did you go about researching the languages correctly, and also what made you include them?
Yeah, she said in House Sand and Fog, in this new novel, The Garden of Last Days, I've used, there's an Iranian character and a Saudi character, and I'm using some of their own language. How did I research it? How do I know what's right? And why use it? Iranian, I was conversational in Farsi because I fell in love with a Persian girl in college. And just absolutely adored her, and quickly discovered you couldn't date a Shiite Muslim girl like I was dating. This is the truth, I'll just say it again. I mean, at dinner, okay, when I was 17, a date was, I got a 6-pack of warm beer, let's go sit in the weeds and drink it, look at the stars, honey. That was a date with me. She was an upper-class, proper Iranian girl from a culture I knew nothing about, and the only way to spend time with her was to go to her house, her apartment where her mother lived, near the campus, where she was chaperoning her, and I spent time with her family for 2.5 years. and I learned Farsi. I can't read or write. I wasn't fluent, but I got to the point where I could really just about understand what most people were talking about. The Arabic stuff, it's all new to me. New to me. I completely new. But the reason I'm using sprinkles of the language is first to give veracity and authenticity to the character's sound, but also to help me find the sound. You know, for instance, and Saudi Arabia is a very interesting culture. It's full of ancient tribes and clans who have their own sub-languages. You know, so the word for, and it's a culture that's very, as you know, strict. You know, women are covered, there's no music, there's no cinema, sex isn't talked about, forget that. So how do you even find out what a Saudi, forget Arabic, because they're all different cultures. This whole idea of the Arab world is, I think, a misnomer. Bahrain is very different than Jordan, which is different than Syria, which is different than Egypt. They have Sunni Muslim Islam in common, but I don't think a hell of a lot more. So the word for breast was very hard to find. And I think I got pretty close to what someone from the southwestern province of Saudi Arabia would call it. And it really is the direct translation for nuhud are glands. They can't get any more than that. But how can you write from the point of view of a young man from such a restrictive culture in a strip club in Florida in the summer, surrounded by naked female flesh, without trying to find the word that he would have for the breast he's never seen before? By the way, that's another thing that I got out of writing this book. I think a lot of these young guys were virgins. I really do. But read the book.
I know since you're a teacher, and a lot of us are writing students, and we're never going to get to take your class, what is an assignment that you would give us if you could ever get it back?
God, do I love these students here. Did you hear that? He said, you know, if I was your writing student, what's a writing assignment you would give us? Well, can I tell you one that I just gave yesterday?
Sure.
It's kind of a creepy assignment. You observe a stranger. You don't stalk him or her. You don't follow them. You don't look in their windows. But you kind of do what writers do anyway, which is we're kind of shameless voyeurs and eavesdroppers. You know, I mean, I can't tell you. I cannot drive. Yeah, right, Miranda? I cannot drive through a neighborhood slowly without looking in all the windows. Oh, what are they watching? Oh, check it out. That's a widescreen. Oh, look. I think they're fighting. Why is he eating alone? I'm going to get in an accident. So I say, why don't you go observe a stranger? It could be, 3 minutes on the highway, you see someone. Here's an image that I had a few years ago. I was late for class. I'm driving my truck way too fast to class. I'm doing like 80, cruise control, and looking at my watch. Car zips by me in the fast lane. They had to be doing 95. And I catch just a second glimpse. It's a Lexus, and a very well-dressed, like business suit, dressed woman is in the front seat, very attractive, looks like a power wet lady. She's got a laptop open, and she's on the phone. And she's going 95 miles an hour, and in the back seat are her 2 toddlers in car seats. I kid you not. And I'm driving. I have not been able to, now I just gave it to you writers. You're going to steal it. But I remember looking down and thinking, first of all, I was angry, right? So are you going to kill the kids? Jesus Christ, you're speeding. Of course I'm speeding, but you're really speeding. And I can't get out of my mind. So the exercise would be follow that. Wait until someone comes throughout your day who piques your curiosity just a little bit. And this is what I truly believe. I believe the only fuel you need is not what you know, but what you don't know. So Faulkner was asked late in his life, what's the main thing a young writer needs to try to create what you've created, sir? He said, it's not talent. He said, I used to think it was talent. He said, but not anymore. And he said, well, what is it? He said, curiosity. His exact words were insight, to mull and to muse why it is that man does what he does. And if you have that, then talent doesn't make much difference, whether you've got it or not. So go through the day, wait till you see someone who gets your curiosity even a little bit. An old man, an old lady, a little kid, some guy you don't know. And then go home and write a scene, a memory of theirs. One of their memories. There's another line I love from the writer Grace Paley. She says, we write what we don't know we know. It's cool, mysterious stuff, this creative writing. And it's more accessible to more people than they realize. I've done a lot of things in my life. What led me to write my first novel? I have to say, though, that these jobs I did, I actually did take the private investigation and bounty hunting job because it was night work. I'd sit in my car, the guy paid me cash, and I wrote every morning because I prefer to write in the morning. I recommend that for you writers, by the way, if you can. If you have to get up at 4 in the morning, do it. The reason I think it's helpful to write in the morning, or even after an afternoon nap, if anyone has time for one of those anymore, is you go, what the Irish writer Edna O'Brien said, you go from the dream world to the dream world. So I like to write in the morning for that reason. What drove me to start writing fiction was I was dating this, it's always a woman for me, I'm sorry. I was dating this girl and she was a fiction writer. And she had a crush on Joe in the class. And I friggin' hated Joe. She come home, the way you women do, you can't hide a crush. I mean, her eyes are shining, her cheeks are pink without the rouge, blush, whatever you call it. And she's going, you should read what Joe wrote. He's so sensitive, he's so talented. And he plays the guitar, too. I wanted to kill him. I really did. And then one day, she's gone. I'm in her dorm room. I happened to see on the bed, all right, I took it out of her drawer. I happened to see a story by Joe. I found a story by Joe. It's called The Diner. It's like 4 or 5 pages long. I started reading. I was getting ready to go to a PhD in social theory, and I was reading a bunch of political science. I hadn't been reading fiction much. And it's a story about a young kid, 16 years old, working a night job, cleaning up in a diner, and up in the Northeast, and there's a neon light shining through the window, and it's a very subtle story. 2 middle-aged hookers come in, and they just get treated rudely by the owner. Nothing dramatic, just they weren't treated respectfully, and they walk out, and this kid's mopping the floor, the 3 in the morning, neon light coming through the diner window, and he says, "That's not right. That's just not right." And man, when I finished that story, I was in love with Joe too. And honestly, I didn't know at the time, but I felt inspired. I really felt inspired. I wanted to write a scene. I wanted to write a scene. So I started writing, and I haven't stopped. And the reason I haven't stopped is I wasn't trying to be a writer. I wasn't trying to write books. I love having books, but it's never been the goal. The goal is, honestly, and I recommend for all you guys who are, especially you young people here, don't be so rational all the time. Don't just go get the thing that's going to make you money. Everyone's going to have to eat. You'll find a way to eat. Go find that thing that when you do it, leaves you feeling more like you than when you don't. And for me, it was writing. I just felt like me. For my wife, she's a dancer. She's not that kind of dancer. But she has to dance to be Fontaine. She's not her if she doesn't. So that's why I started writing, and that's why I keep writing. I wrote today, I've been traveling a lot, and I'm an insomniac, so I have like 3 hours sleep the last 3 days, and, I had a late, plane was canceled today, and I said, I could sleep for an hour and 22 minutes. But no, I got to see where I left those guys off yesterday in my notebook, so I stole the writing time. It sounds like discipline. No, it's self-care. I'm more Andre now because I did that today. Does that make sense? The question was, are there plans to have House Sand and Fog in this new novel translated into Farsi or Arabic, and could there be any backlash? It does not have a publisher in Iran, but there are 3 bootleg copies of House of Sand and Fog in Farsi in Iran. And it's in 30 countries, in languages I'll never speak. And I feel very blessed to be able to say that. I don't know about The Garden of Last Days already has 6 publishers abroad. And I have worried deeply about offending my Muslim brothers. I cannot tell you enough I'm telling you, I'm going to get in trouble. I'll just admit it right here to this audience. Yeah. Well, but let me explain the difference here. The Danish editor who commissioned the cartoonist to draw obscene photos of the Prophet Muhammad, I find that absolutely reprehensible. I think it's a disrespectful use of freedom of speech. And I think it's needless and really destructive. Let me just spill my guts here out loud. This is a strange, sustained act of empathy being this guy, but I do not sympathize with him or his brothers in any stretch. I think they're from a bizarre little death cult, not Islam. The interpretation of it in their small little cohort that has a very interesting history. By the way, if you want to know more about these guys, other than reading my book, and buying 6 for your friends. Read The Looming Tower by Lawrence Wright, won the Pulitzer Prize for nonfiction last year. Read The Far Enemy by Fawaz Gerges. He's a political scientist. It'll give you this whole history of extremist Islamic thinking. These people are a minority. So I was trying to walk a fine line between capturing the truth of someone who has subjugated the religion that millions of people have been practicing for 1,400 years without hurting anybody, actually using it to be more merciful, compassionate people, yet trying to capture how they have perverted it, this handful of terrorist guys. I would be surprised, I don't know who you're going to offend. The reason, though, that there was such an outcry in Denmark was in Islam, there cannot even be the existence of icons. The big thing I learned about Islam is that it's the most purely monotheistic religion out of the three, and that you can't even have a drawing of the Prophet Muhammad. There can't even be any sort of artistic representation. Never mind one with bestial sexuality. That was so wrong of Denmark, of that editor to do. I tried to write respectfully about Islam while also trying to capture those who perverted it. So I have a hunch I'm going to tick off mainstream America, who may confuse my empathy with sympathy and accuse me of fraternizing with the enemy, which is an understandable reaction, but if they read it, I don't think they're going to feel that way. And I may very well tick off moderate Muslims who, especially in this country, who are trying valiantly to get away from this terroristic patina which they do not deserve, because I brought up the old pussy wound again. But I've also tried to have people in this book, like Karim, who I read from today, who are moderate, who actually interpret the Quran in a way that actually, is not hateful. If I'm in trouble, I'm in trouble. That's what writers do. He talks about writing as an art form in its own right, and art conveys messages, right? And so what message am I trying to convey with this book? I do not know. And I know that sounds disingenuous and like a cop-out, but I really do think that writing is this intuitive thing. And I learn a lot more about books I've written by reading reviews about them, by talking to readers who've read them, by talking to students who've read them. I got an insight into my novel House in Santa Fog tonight. And about antagonists. There are no antagonists. I mean, they're all antagonists. I thought, yeah, good point, right? I don't mean to sound disingenuous there, but let me say this. Whenever I've tried to say something with fiction, I've killed it. It's like an early Spike Lee film, my hat off to Spike Lee. But some of the earlier films where you can really feel him sticking his philosophy in characters' mouths, and as he's matured, it's more artful. I'm not trying to say anything. I was trying to find and explore things here. I'll tell you one thing I found. These guys who did this terrible thing were people too. And they had their twisted reasons. And I do not think anyone who reads this book is going to come away feeling warm towards them, but you're going to come away with a clearer understanding of what joins us and what separates us. And right now, I don't think that's out there. But I was not trying to say any of that. I was just trying to find something.